The market smelled of rust, sweat, and fear. It was not a place for the weak. Tall iron cages stood in long rows, each holding someone whose life had been stolen. Chains clinked with every small movement, the sound mixing with the loud voices of traders and buyers. It was the black market, where living beings were sold like livestock. Here, a person's worth was not measured by their heart or mind, but by weight and by the pleasure they could give. In the center of it all, a small, alien girl sat in a cage, her knees drawn to her chest. Her hair was tangled and dusty, her thin arms wrapped around herself for warmth. She had no name anymore, only a number burned into a metal tag hanging from her neck. Her eyes, once bright, had lost their light. The crowd around her laughed and made crude jokes. Some pointed at her like she was a strange animal. Others discussed her weight like they were buying meat for a feast. The auctioneer, a tall alien with gray skin and sharp teeth, banged his staff on the platform. "Next up," he shouted. "Lot number 49, pure exotic breed. Suitable for entertainment, sold by the kilo." The crowd cheered, their voices thick with greed. The girl stared at the floor, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. She had learned long ago that looking into a buyer's eyes only made things worse. Hope had left her long before this day. She had been bought and sold too many times to believe in miracles. But then, she noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A tall figure in a dark coat stepped forward, his face shadowed by the hood. Unlike the others, he didn't laugh, he didn't shout, he didn't drool over her like the rest. He simply watched, his arms crossed, his posture calm. The auctioneer spotted him and smirked. Well, a human in my market," he called out. "What brings you here, stranger? Looking for some entertainment?" The crowd laughed, some muttering insults about humans being poor or foolish. The man didn't answer their mockery. He stepped closer to the cage, his eyes meeting the girl's for a brief moment. She froze, feeling something strange in his gaze. It was not hunger, not cruelty. It was something she couldn't name. Her heart gave a small, painful beat. The auctioneer started the bidding at a low price, expecting the girl to sell quickly. Hands shot up, prices rose. Voices shouted, but the human waited, saying nothing. Finally, when the crowd began to slow, he raised his hand. His bid was higher than anyone expected. The market fell silent for a moment. The auctioneer grinned, sensing a bigger profit. Another buyer tried to outbid him, but the human raised his price again without hesitation. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Why would a human pay so much for something everyone else saw as worthless? After a tense minute, the auctioneer slammed his staff down. "Sold," he announced to the human in the coat. The girl felt a mix of fear and confusion. She had been bought again, but this time it felt different. The human stepped forward, handing over the payment without a word. The auctioneer unlocked the cage and shoved her toward the man. She stumbled, expecting to be dragged by her chain like always. Instead, the human reached up and unhooked the metal collar, letting it drop to the ground with a heavy clink. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer laughed mockingly. "You're too soft, human. That one will bite you the moment you turn your back." The man ignored him and simply said, "Let's go." The girl followed, her bare feet silent on the dusty floor. Every step felt unreal. She kept her eyes on the ground, waiting for the moment he would show his true nature. They walked through the market's narrow alleys, past stalls filled with stolen goods and dangerous eyes. The human's presence seemed to make some of the traders uneasy. Others glared at him, muttering that he was wasting his money. When they reached the exit gate, the guard stopped them. Demanding proof of purchase, the human showed the receipt without hesitation, and they were allowed to leave outside. The air felt colder, cleaner. The girl took a deep breath, not realizing until that moment how heavy the market's air had been. The human glanced at her but said nothing. They walked in silence through winding streets until they reached a quiet corner of the city. Finally, he stopped in front of a small, worn-down building. He unlocked the door and gestured for her to enter. She hesitated, her mind filled with Questions and fears. Why was he being kind? Why hadn't he hurt her yet? Was this just another cruel trick? Inside, the room was simple but warm. There was a table with food, a small bed in the corner, and a clean pitcher of water. He pointed to the food. "Eat," he said quietly. She didn't move, unsure if she was allowed. "Go ahead," he added. His voice calm. Slowly, she stepped forward, her hands trembling as she picked up a piece of bread. She took a small bite, expecting him to snatch it away. But he just stood there, leaning against the wall, watching her with steady eyes. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest spark of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The city streets outside the black market were quiet, but the girl's mind was anything but calm. She walked a few steps behind the human, her eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. Years of being owned had taught her that kindness was always a mask. Sooner or later, it would fall away, and the truth would come out. She told herself not to trust the way he had removed her chain, not to trust the way he had let her eat without shouting. It had to be a trick. It always was. The human said nothing as they moved through narrow alleys. He didn't ask her questions, didn't tell her what to do. His steps were calm, steady, like he was walking through familiar territory. From time to time, he glanced back to make sure she was still there, but there was no sharpness in his eyes. No threat. It confused her, and confusion felt dangerous. She kept her guard up, her shoulders tense. When they reached his small building, he pushed the door open and stepped aside. "Go in," he said quietly. She froze for a moment before crossing the threshold. Inside, the air was warmer than the streets. The scent of food lingered faintly in the room. The table still had bread from earlier, and there was a bowl of clean water. She looked at him, waiting for an order, but he simply walked past her and set down a small bag on the counter. He took off his coat, revealing simple clothing underneath, nothing like the fine silks of the traders she had known. She noticed faint scars on his forearms, pale lines that told silent stories. Scars meant he had fought before, maybe many times. But she couldn't tell if those battles had been for survival or for cruelty. He sat down and motioned for her to eat again. Her stomach growled, betraying her. Slowly she moved to the table. She picked up a piece of bread, dipping it in the vey. Water to soften it before chewing. Her eyes stayed on him the entire time. He didn't move, didn't even reach for her, just sat there like he had all the time in the world. After a few minutes, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the auction. "Why? Why did you buy me?" Her voice was quiet, unsure if she was even allowed to ask. The man looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because no one else saw your worth," he said. The words hit her in a way she didn't expect. She had been called many things in her life: animal, property, trash, but never worth anything. She looked away quickly, not wanting him to see the small crack in her defenses. "You'll be safe here," he added. "No one will hurt you." Her instincts told her not to believe it. The world she knew had no safe places, no honest promises. Still, something about the way he spoke made her hesitate. There was no pressure in his voice, no demand for gratitude. It was simply a statement that made it harder to ignore. The next few days passed quietly. The human left the building in the mornings and returned with food in the evenings. He never asked her to serve him, never told her to clean when she offered to help out of habit. He just shook his head and told her to rest. At night, she slept on the small bed in the corner. It was rough, but softer than the cold floors of the cages. She would often wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, expecting to hear angry voices, but all she ever heard was the soft sound of the wind outside. Her wariness began to crack, just a little. One evening, she found herself telling him small pieces of her story, how she had been taken from her home when she was young, how her people had been scattered, sold, and forgotten. She didn't tell him everything. Trust was still far away, but the words felt strange on her tongue, like they belonged to a person she barely remembered. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she stopped speaking, He simply nodded and said, "I'm sorry." It was the first time anyone had ever said that to her and meant it. But outside, in the darker parts of the city, the story of the strange human was spreading. The traders who had lost the auction mocked him openly. Some said he was weak for treating a slave like a person. Others suspected he had some hidden plan, and a few were angry enough to think about taking back what they believed was theirs. One night, as she was about to fall asleep, she heard voices outside the window, harsh whispers, the sound of boots on stone. She froze, her body tense. The human was already awake. Moving silently toward the door, he gave her a look. "Stay quiet, stay hidden." She pressed herself into the corner, her heart pounding. Through the crack in the wall, she saw shadowy figures passing by. They didn't knock, but the air outside felt heavy with danger. After a few long minutes, the sound of footsteps faded. The human locked the door and came back inside. "They're watching us now," he said calmly. She didn't need to ask who they were. That night, she lay awake long after he had gone to bed. For the first time, she realized that whatever his reasons, the human was now part of her fate, and if the market wanted her back, they would have to go through him. Morning light crept through the cracked window, casting thin lines across the floor. The girl lay still on the bed, pretending to sleep, but her mind was wide awake. She listened to the human moving around the room, the soft clink of metal, the quiet rustle of cloth. He moved without hurry, his steps steady, as if the world outside wasn't full of danger. Finally, she sat up, watching him from the corner of her eye. He was filling a small bag with supplies, water, dried food, and a folded blanket. "Going out?" she asked quietly, her voice still unsure whether she was allowed to speak first. "Yes," he replied. "I'll be back before dark." No explanations, no details, just simple words. In her old life, a master leaving would have meant fear of what they'd bring back or what mood they'd return in. But now, the fear was different. She worried he might not come back at all. And for reasons she didn't understand yet, the thought bothered her when he left. She wandered the small room. It was plain but warm, the walls old but clean. There was no locked storage, no secret chains hidden in corners. The only weapons she found were a small knife on the table and a sturdy walking stick by the door. She stared at them for a long time, thinking how easy it would be to run. No one was guarding her. No one had told her she couldn't leave. But when she opened the door and stepped into the street, she stopped. The cold wind stung her skin, and the memories of the market came rushing back. She saw the faces of the traders in her mind, ones who would take her back in an instant. Without realizing it, she closed the door and locked it from the inside. That evening, when he returned, he carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He set it on the table and gestured for her to open. Inside was a piece of clothing, simple but new, made from soft fabric. Her eyes widened slightly. "This is for me?" He nodded. "Yours." She touched the cloth carefully, half expecting it to vanish. It had been years since she had owned anything that was truly hers. She muttered a quiet thank you without looking up. He didn't respond with a smile or grand words, just moved to prepare the food. But something in her chest shifted, like a locked door opening just a crack. Over the next few days, small changes began to happen. She started eating without waiting for permission. She began to sit at the table instead of keeping to the corner. Sometimes she even asked him questions, not personal ones, but about the streets, the weather, the food, and he answered them with the same calm tone every time. No sharpness, no anger. Slowly, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't pretending. One night, as they sat in silence, she spoke without thinking. "My name is Kira," she said softly. It was the first time she had said her own name in years. The human looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Kira," he repeated, as if testing the sound. It was strange to hear her name spoken with no mockery, no disgust. For a moment, she almost felt human again. In return, she asked for his name. "Jaran," he said simply. She repeated it in mind. Trying to get used to the sound, names were dangerous. They meant connection, and connection could be broken, but this one felt solid. The next day, Jaron asked her to walk with him to the edge of the market district, not into the market itself, but close enough for her to see the guards and the busy streets. At first, she thought it was a test, but as they walked, she noticed he kept her close, always positioning himself between her and anyone who looked too long. Once, a group of rough-looking men glanced at her and whispered. Jaron's gaze snapped to them, cold and warning. They looked away quickly. Something in her tightened, not from fear, but from the strange feeling of being protected. That evening, as they returned, she found herself talking more. She told him about her homeworld, not the painful parts, but the small, ordinary things. How the sky had two moons, how the air smelled after the rain. He listened, not interrupting, not changing the subject. And when she stopped, he asked gentle questions. No one had ever asked her about her past without using it against her. But trust is never built without fear. One night, she woke to the sound of footsteps outside again. This time, there were more voices, low and angry. Jaron was already awake, standing by the door with the knife in his hand. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept his breathing quiet. The voices faded after a few minutes, but Jaron didn't relax right away. They're getting closer, he said at last. Kira swallowed hard, understanding exactly what he meant. The market wanted her back, and they were not going to stop. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time, she admitted something to herself. She didn't just want to stay because she was safer with Jaron. She wanted to stay because she was starting to believe him, starting to believe that maybe he really did see her worth. The night air was heavy with the smell of rain. Kira sat by the small window, watching drops gather on the cracked glass. Jaron was across the room, sharpening the edge of his knife with slow, steady strokes. Neither of them spoke, but both knew the same thing. Danger was getting closer. For days, the shadows outside had grown bolder. They no longer hid far away. They lingered, watching, waiting. The black market did not forget its property, and it never forgave a thief. A loud knock broke the silence. It wasn't the kind of knock you gave a friend. It was sharp, heavy, and meant to break walls. Kira's heart jumped, and her body tensed automatically. Jaron stood, his knife still in his hand, his other hand motioning for her to stay back. The knocking came again, harder this time, followed by a voice. "Open up, human, we just want to talk." The tone was mocking, carrying the false sweetness of a predator. Jaron stepped to the door but didn't open it. "Not interested," he called back. The voice outside laughed, joined by others. "Oh, come on, you have something that belongs to us." Kira's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what they meant. Before she could move, Jaron glanced over his shoulder at her. His eyes were calm but sharp, silently telling her not to panic. The next sound was metal on metal. Someone was trying to force the lock. Jaron moved fast, grabbing the walking stick from the corner. The door burst open with a crash, and 3 figures stormed in. Their skin was pale blue, their eyes narrow, and each carried a short blade. The leader sneered at Jaron. "Step aside, human. You can keep your life if you give us the girl." "Not happening," Jaron said, his voice flat. The leader's smile faded into a snarl. The first attacker lunged, aiming for Jaron's chest. But Jaron sidestepped and swung the walking stick, striking the alien's arm with a crack. The blade clattered to the floor. The second attacker came from the side, but Jaron blocked with the stick and drove his knee into the alien's ribs. The room filled with grunts and the scrape of feet on the floorboards. Kira pressed herself against the wall, her hands trembling. She hated feeling useless, hated watching someone else fight for her. The leader drew a hidden weapon, a narrow, curved dagger that gleamed in the dim light. Jaron met his eyes, both of them circling like predators. The leader feinted left, then slashed right. Jaron caught the strike on the stick, but the blade sliced across his arm. Blood bloomed quickly, dark against his sleeve. Kira gasped, but Jaron didn't flinch. With a swift motion, he hooked the stick behind the leader's knee and pulled. The alien crashed to the floor. The dagger skidding away, the other two grabbed their leader and backed toward the door. "This isn't over," one spat. Jaren didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing hard, watching them retreat into the night. When the door finally shut, the room felt too quiet. Jaren leaned the stick against the wall and pressed his hand to the cut on his arm. Kira rushed to him, her fear overpowering her hesitation. "Sit," she said, her voice shaking but firm. He gave her a small nod and sat down. She found a clean cloth and wrapped it around his arm, her hands unsteady. "You could have died," she muttered. "They weren't good enough to manage that," he replied, his tone calm but tired. Still, she could see the weight in his eyes. This was only the beginning. "They'll come back," Kira said quietly. "Yes," Jaren agreed. "And next time they might bring more." The thought made her chest tighten. For so long she had survived by hiding, by staying invisible. But now staying meant fighting. She looked at him and realized something. He had risked his life without hesitation. Not because she could pay him back, not because he expected anything in return, but because he refused to hand her over. That was a kind of protection she had never known. She sat by him for the rest of the night, listening for any sound outside. Every creak of the wood made her flinch. But the street stayed quiet until morning. When the sun rose, the blood on the cloth around his arm had dried. Jaren stood and began packing a bag. "We can't stay here anymore," he said. Kira didn't argue. If the black market wanted her badly enough to attack in the open, they wouldn't stop until they got her. As they stepped out into the pale morning light, Kira looked back at the small building. It had been the first place in years where she felt a little safe. Now it was just another memory to leave behind. But this time, she wasn't leaving in chains. She was walking beside someone who had chosen to protect her, and that made all the difference. The streets were still wet from the night's rain. Kira and Jaren moved quickly, their footsteps light, their eyes scanning every shadow. Jaren kept his injured arm close to his body, but his pace didn't slow. The wound was bound tight. And though it hurt, he didn't complain. They didn't speak much. Every word felt too loud in the silence of early morning. Behind them, the city was waking up, voices rising, doors opening, market stalls creaking to life. But somewhere in that noise, there were hunters looking for them. They slipped into a side alley. Avoiding the main roads, Jaren led with confidence, taking turns that seemed random to Kira, but clearly had a purpose. She realized he was leading them away from crowded areas, away from the places the black market controlled. Every so often, he would pause, listening, then move again. It was like traveling with someone who could hear danger before it arrived. Kira stayed close, her eyes scanning rooftops and corners. She wasn't used to being out in the open like this. It felt both freeing and terrifying. By midday, they reached the edge of the city. A tall metal wall separated the urban sprawl from the wild lands beyond. The gates were guarded by two alien sentries, their armor dull but their weapons sharp. Jaren didn't approach the gate. Instead, he took her to a section of the wall where the metal was rusted. "This way," he said quietly. Pulling out a small tool from his pocket, he worked quickly, loosening bolts until a narrow panel shifted enough for them to squeeze through. Kira glanced back one last time at the city. Part of her wanted to believe they were leaving the danger behind. But deep down, she knew the black market's reach could extend far beyond these walls. On the other side, the air smelled different, wilder, sharper. The land stretched out in uneven hills, patches of forest, and broken stone. There was no clear road, only faint paths worn by traders and wanderers. They moved into the hills, staying low, using the terrain to hide their movements. Kira began to notice something she hadn't before. Jaren's pace matched hers perfectly. He never pushed too hard, never made her run faster than she could. But he also never stopped moving. That night, they found shelter in the remains of an old transport ship half buried in the earth. The walls were dented and covered in moss, But inside it was dry and out of the wind. Jaren built a small fire in a corner, its light casting shadows across the metal walls. Kira sat close to the warmth, her knees drawn to her chest. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Done what?" he asked. "Run," she replied. Jaren looked into the fire for a moment before answering. "Yeah," was all he said, but there was weight in the word. They ate a simple meal of dried food and shared a flask of water. Kira kept glancing at his injured arm. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Not enough to stop me," he said with a faint smirk. She didn't smile back. "You should rest more." He didn't argue, but she could tell he wouldn't take her advice. That night, she stayed awake longer than usual, listening to the distant sounds outside, the wind in the trees, the rustle of leaves, the far-off cry of an animal. No voices, no footsteps, but the unease never left her. By the next day, their journey took them through a narrow canyon. The rock walls rose high on both sides, making it impossible to see far ahead. Jaren's steps slowed, his hand resting lightly on the walking stick strapped to his back. Kira felt her heartbeat quicken. Suddenly, a small stone fell from above. Clattering onto the path, they both froze. Jaren's eyes moved upward, scanning the ridge. A shadow shifted, then disappeared. "They found us," he said under his breath. They moved fast, Jaren leading them deeper into the canyon where the walls bent sharply. But the sound of pursuit was clear, now multiple footsteps, closing in. Jaren pulled Kira toward a narrow crack in the canyon wall, just wide enough to slip through inside. They found themselves in a small hollow hidden from view. They waited, holding their breath. The footsteps grew louder, voices speaking in a language Kira recognized: black market hunters. They passed by without noticing the hiding spot, their sounds fading into the distance. Kira exhaled slowly, her hands still trembling. "You knew where to hide," she whispered. Jaren gave a small nod. "Always have an exit." When they finally emerged, the sun was setting. The sky burned orange and red, casting long shadows across the land. They kept walking until the stars began to appear. Kira felt the exhaustion in her legs, but she didn't complain. Every step away from the city felt like another chain breaking. But every step also brought the question, how long until the hunters caught up again? That night, as they camped under the open sky, Kira lay awake beside the dying fire. For years, her life had been running from one cage to another. But now, even though danger was still behind them, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: choice. And it was because Jaren had refused to give her back. She didn't say it out loud, but the truth settled in her heart. No matter where they ran, she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. The dawn came cold and pale. Kira sat close to the small fire, rubbing her hands for warmth. Jaren was already awake, checking the contents of his bag. He looked tired but focused, the kind of focus that meant he was thinking 3 steps ahead. For days, they had been moving without a destination, just keeping ahead of the hunters. But the truth was clear: running would not last forever. Sooner or later, the black market would catch up. "We can't keep doing this," Jaren said quietly. Breaking the silence, Kira looked up. "Doing what?" "Running," he replied. "They'll chase us until they have you, or until I'm dead." She didn't like hearing it, but she knew it was the truth. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We make them stop," he said, his voice calm but hard. Kira stared at him, unsure what he meant. Jaren leaned forward, speaking low. "I know how the market works. Every shipment, every deal, every bribe." Her eyes widened slightly. "How?" He gave a small shrug. "I've been places I'm not proud of." He didn't explain further, but she could hear in his voice that he wasn't lying. "They can't be destroyed by force," he continued. "Too many guards, too many buyers." "So what then?" she asked. "We expose them," Jaren said. "We give the authorities proof they can't ignore." The idea sounded dangerous, maybe impossible. But as she thought about the faces of those still trapped in cages, she felt a fire inside her chest. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Jaren studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You know the market better than I do," he said. "You know where they hide things, where they move people." Kira's jaw tightened. "Yes, I know." That day they began planning. They sat on the floor of their small camp, drawing rough maps in the dirt. Kira marked the alleyways that led to hidden storage rooms. She explained where the traders kept their private ledgers. She described the schedule of shipments, when they arrived, who handled them. Jarin listened carefully, asking questions, filling in gaps with his own knowledge. The plan grew piece by piece, dangerous and thin, but possible. By nightfall, they had decided on their move. They would return to the outer edge of the city, not to the market itself, but close enough to reach it quickly. They would sneak in during the early hours before sunrise. Kira would guide him through the back routes. Jarin would plant small tracking devices he had kept hidden in his bag. Once active, they would transmit the location of every major shipment directly to the authorities. It was risky. One wrong step, and they'd both end up in chains. 2 nights later, they were back near the city walls. The air felt heavier here, as if the streets themselves carried the whispers of the black market. Jarin kept them moving quietly. Sticking to shadows, Kira led him through a half-collapsed tunnel she had used long ago. It smelled of damp stone and rust, but it kept them hidden from patrols. When they emerged, the market district loomed ahead. Even at night, faint lights glowed from behind locked doors. Some stalls were empty, others guarded by silhouettes leaning against the walls. Kira's heartbeat quickened. Every creak, every distant footstep made her muscles tighten. She guided Jarin to the first drop point, a storage shed with a broken lock. He slipped inside, knelt in the dark, and attached one of the trackers beneath a crate. It blinked once before going silent, its signal already moving into the night. They moved to the second target, a warehouse near the center of the district. This time, 2 guards stood nearby, talking in low voices. Kira pulled Jarin into the shadows, her breath quick. "Wait until they turn," she whispered. When the guards finally faced away, they slipped inside. The tracker went under a stack of heavy boxes, hidden perfectly in the shadows. By the time they reached the last target, a large shipment platform, they knew they had been lucky so far, but luck runs thin when danger is close. As Jarin knelt to place the final tracker, a sharp voice cut through the air. Well, look who came back." Kira's stomach dropped. From the darkness, 3 hunters stepped forward, their weapons glinting in the faint light. The leader grinned. "You should have stayed gone, human." Jarin stood slowly, stepping between them. "And Kira?" "We're leaving," he said flatly. "No," the leader replied. "You're staying. And she's coming with us." The tension cracked like lightning. One of the hunters lunged, and Jarin moved instantly, knocking the weapon aside with his walking stick. Kira grabbed the loose metal rod from the ground, her hands shaking but ready. They fought in the narrow space, blows striking wood and metal. Jarin knocked one attacker into a stack of crates, sending them crashing to the floor. Kira swung wildly, striking another in the arm. Forcing him back, the leader cursed and whistled, sharply, a signal for more backup. Jarin grabbed Kira's arm, pulling her toward the side exit. They ran, footsteps pounding, shouts rising behind them. Through twisting alleys and dark corners, they didn't stop until the market lights were far behind. When they finally reached the safety of the tunnel, both were breathing hard. Jarin looked at her, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "They know we're coming for them now." Kira met his gaze, the fire in her chest burning brighter. "Good," she said. "Let them be afraid for once." The city was waking under a gray sky. Kira and Jarin crouched in the shadows of an abandoned building, watching the market district from a distance. The trackers they had planted days ago were now active, sending signals far beyond the city walls. Somewhere far away, authorities were reading those signals, preparing to strike. Jarin's plan was dangerous, but it was already in motion, and there was no turning back. The market looked the same as always, stalls covered with bright cloth, traders shouting about their goods, buyers wandering through with greedy eyes. But beneath that noise was a current of tension. Kira could see it in the way guards kept glancing around. In the way some traders spoke in hushed tones. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know what. Jaren glanced at her. When it starts, we move. She nodded, her heart pounding. Part of her still couldn't believe they had come back here willingly. For years she had dreamed of never seeing this place again. Now she was waiting for the moment it would burn. It began with a sound unlike anything the market had heard before, a deep, distant hum that grew louder by the second. Then came the roar of engines overhead, from the clouds. Sleek enforcement ships descended, their hulls marked with the insignia of the Interplanetary Authority. The traders froze, the guards shouted in panic, and the market's illusion of control shattered in an instant. The ships landed at every exit, armed officers pouring out. Their weapons were raised, their voices sharp and commanding. Stand down. This market is under investigation. Some tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Others fought, but the officers moved quickly, stunning them with precise shots. The chaos was loud, but to Kira, it was the sound of chains breaking. Jaren tapped her arm. Now they moved. Through the confusion, slipping between panicked buyers and fleeing traders, Kira led the way, her knowledge of the alleys helping them avoid the worst of the fighting. But Jaren wasn't here just to escape. He was here to make sure the black market couldn't rise again. They reached the central platform, the heart of the market where the largest deals were made. It was there that the main ledgers were kept, books filled with names, payments, and transactions. The door to the ledger room was locked. But Jaren didn't hesitate. With a swift kick, the old hinges gave way. Inside, shelves of paper and data tablets lined the walls. Kira's stomach turned at the sight. Each record was another life sold, another family torn apart. They began gathering everything they could, stuffing it into bags. Shouts outside grew louder. Traders, realizing their secrets were being taken. 2 guards burst into the room, weapons ready. Jaren stepped forward, his walking stick in one hand, the other gripping the small knife. The fight was quick. One guard went down with a strike to the ribs. The other was disarmed and shoved out the door. Go, Jaren said, and they moved fast, the bags heavy with proof. They emerged into the main square, just as the largest of the enforcement ships lifted off. Its speakers blared orders for surrender. The black market's leaders were already in custody. Dragged away in chains, Kira saw faces she recognized, slavers who had once owned her. Now powerless and afraid, she didn't feel pity, only relief. At the edge of the district, an officer intercepted them. Jaren handed over the bags without a word. The officer's eyes widened as he saw the contents. This will put them away. For good, he said. Kira felt the weight on her chest ease. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every name in those ledgers. When it was over, the market was silent. The stalls were empty, the cages gone. The air felt cleaner, as if the place itself was breathing again. Kira stood in the middle of the square, the memories still heavy. Jaren walked up beside her. It's done, he said quietly. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. Not for everyone, she replied. Some are still out there. We can't save the whole galaxy, he said, but we saved this part of it. They left the city that evening, walking side by side. The streets felt different now, not because they were safer, but because she wasn't walking them alone. When they reached the outskirts, Kira stopped. Jaren turned to her. What is it? She took a deep breath. I could go anywhere now, she said, but I want to go where you go. His brow furrowed slightly. You don't owe me anything. It's not about owing, she said, her voice steady. It's about choice. For the first time in years, she was choosing her own path, and that path was with the man who had seen her worth when no one else did. Jaren gave a small nod, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Then let's keep walking, he said. They turned toward the horizon, the last light of day painting the sky in gold and red. The city faded behind them, the road ahead open and unknown. But whatever came next, Kira knew one thing with certainty. She was free, truly free, and she would never be weighed or chained again.